IVM.
The Spartan Poker presents Mera Kaam Poker with Azeem and Peter. Good day, fair people. Welcome to another episode of Mera Kaam Poker, presented by the Spartan Poker, fun podcast about poker, life and other things that we can't think of currently.
ये बहुत discrimination वाला entry है. Fair people मतलब what? Dude?
Okay, dark people of all complexions and ethnicities and everyone.
My South Indian complexion is taking
We
a bit
want
of
to be
beating
safe.
here.
Alright, so we clearly don't know much about poker between Peter and me. Actually, Peter knows a lot. I know very little. Poker fun fact of the day. Fun fact about poker is that the origin of the poker chip. So before the 1800s, the late 1800s, there were no poker chips. And people used weird things. They used gold nuggets. They used gold dust.
How do you use gold dust?
Zara 3 gram के साथ मैं all in जा रहा है. I don't understand.
Like imagine if you won a lot of gold dust and then someone just sneezes at that table. Yeah. You're done for, man.
And coins, they also used to carve chips out of ivory. Bone, that's a bit strange. Like I think you'd have to kill an animal first, which I think is just way too much effort.
बाहर से elephant लेके आओ.
Yes.
मैं बड़ा pot जीतने वाला हूँ.
Clay, and also, but they had to stop doing that because then there were other people who also knew how to do carving, so they would carve those same chips and just bring extra and pretend that they had won more.
Scamming is happening.
It's been around
from
forever.
The 1800s now.
You think Indians are the only people who do this? And also, fun fact about the name of poker. So actually, poker was originally called poke. It is the French word. It is the poke. Why will you poke with me? Which people would run away from guys who said that.
Sounds like a very weird pickup line as well. Would you like to poke with me?
Would you like to do the poke? That's P-O-Q-U-E, fascinatingly. And it was French residents of New Orleans who came up with that name. And then finally the American people was like, what is this poker? Yeah, we're going to call it poker, man.
Yeah,
and that's basically how that happened. So as you can see, clearly we know nothing about poker. We have to find random poker facts of the internet and rebrand them as our own.
But we have the good fortune of having people on the show who know a little bit more than we do.
Yes, and in fact, we're going to get straight into today's conversation because it's so hardcore, so fun, so interesting. We're going to talk about the theory and the science behind poker, and we're very excited to have our guest for today. So just after this quick break, we will get straight into our conversation with the one and only Amit Varma.
As we go to commercials, don't forget, the Spartan Poker's Mera Kaam Poker will be right back after this break.
Hey friend, so if you're listening to a podcast right now, you're probably some kind of a nerd. A nerd at heart at least. So maybe, just maybe, you might like another podcast about nerds, by nerds, and for nerds.
It's called Geek Fruit, a community to unite estranged geeks from across India and later on the world. We talk about television, movies, science fiction, adventure, fantasy, etc. Anything nerdy, it's all here on Geek Fruit.
You can catch a fresh episode every Monday, and you can check us out on any of your favorite podcast apps, like my favorite podcast app, the IVM podcast app. Give me my money, IVM.
Good plug.
Happy listening, you nerds.
Welcome back to the Spartan Poker's Mera Kaam Poker. It's time to go all in.
And it's time again for our wonderfully named segment named by the one and only Naveen Narona.
Po kar lo baat.
Po kar lo baat. I'm going to say this is a horrible name for every episode. This is what we're going to do. And of course, with every episode in this segment, we have a guest who's going to tell us, give us new insights about the world of poker. And today we have the one and only Mr. Amit Varma. Round of applause for Amit Varma. Nobody can hear. Okay, 3 people can hear. Round of applause.
I'm the only one clapping. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so basic introduction of Mr. Amit Varma. He is, of course, a writer, host of the podcast you may have heard called Seen and Unseen. Very interesting podcast, very cerebral podcast, you'd say.
You haven't listened to it, have you?
Well, I just looked at the topics. They look very interesting. And he, of course, took a sabbatical to get seriously into poker. You played for how many years professionally?
I was professional for more than 4 years. Maybe
4 years.
4 to 5 years.
4 years. And he also was a columnist for the Economic Times. Was or still are?
I'm a columnist now of the Times of India, but I used to write a column for the Economic Times on poker specifically.
Poker. Okay, yeah. And,
which was actually, and it still continues to be the only poker related.
Yeah, I think at the time
ever.
it was and still is the only poker column in a mainstream newspaper anywhere in the world. So that's
exactly. And so you know that like we have an intelligent guest in here because it was a column for the Economic Times. It wasn't like, because anyone can write about like Mirror and like Ask This Expert and all that, but Economic Times requires certain level of legit, yes, basically. as the cool kids say. So we asked this to most people. So how did the switch from sort of being a writer to full-time poker happen for you?
I think I casually discovered poker like the way most people do. In my case, through an app on the phone, and then I made a visit to Casino Royale maybe in 2009 or 2010. And those days the game was very soft, and I was lucky enough to have a winning weekend and start off on a winning note. And then I thought, hey, this is great. And it's kind of ironic that, of the two great passions in my life, the first one was writing, which doesn't make you any money.
Right.
And suddenly I stumbled upon another passion, which is just the opposite.
Yeah.
So I said, my God, I got to do this.
Yeah.
And then
No,
I
but it
just
was
got-
also, it doesn't, so writing, as I think we had discussed this on one of the podcasts, was that writing perhaps didn't make you money, but it also didn't lose you money. Like,
Exactly, yeah.
nobody would, like if you wrote a bad article, nobody would make you pay money for that.
I think I figured out pretty fast that I was a profitable player, and I was very lucky in the sense that my learning curve happened back when the games were so soft that even though I was a pretty bad player, I was still making money.
Okay.
And kind of continued down that road.
Okay, so you played...
But for a bad player to have gone on, so-called bad player to have played for like 5 years, like you say, that's a pretty
No,
healthy stretch.
I worked on my game and I improved. I worked on my game, I kind of read books, figured out, thought deeply about the game and improved a lot. And I'm also moved from tournaments to cash games where income is kind of more reliable.
Right.
And eventually I left because, when I got into poker, I thought, hey, I'm going to do this for 3 or 4 years. I'm going to make you money and then I'm going to quit and write for the rest of my life. And then I realized while I was making much more than I would have as a writer by orders of magnitude, I wasn't making money.
Okay.
At which point I figured I've saved up enough to take a couple of years off and do my writing thing and get back into that. Let me do that. So,
Sure. So we were talking just off mic that you had sort of these 5 commandments for poker players. So tell us what those commandments would be.
These were sort of like hard-earned lessons. When I started playing, I learned them over a period of time, and I wrote about them in the column I did for ET as well.
Okay.
The first commandment is play for the long term.
Okay.
Now, what happens is a lot of people get attracted to poker by the glamour of the single event.
Right.
So you'll see Tom Dwan make a great bluff on television, or you'll see somebody win this big event, or maybe a friend of yours wins a Spartan Poker Millionaire and gets 20 lakhs. And you're like, wow, that's great. But actually, poker is a game for the long term in the sense, let me explain that with the analogy non-poker players will understand of a coin flip.
Okay.
Say I give you an evenly weighted coin, and I tell you I'll give you 51 rupees for every heads, but you give me 49 rupees for every tails.
Right.
It's a gamble, but because it's evenly weighted and you get 51 rupees for every head,
Seems like a good deal.
you should immediately, it is a good deal, it's a great deal, you should immediately accept, and in the long run you'll make a lot of money. But in the short run you could have 5 tails in a row.
Right.
Or you could bet the other way and say, no, tails is my lucky number, I don't care, I'll bet on tails, and you could make the wrong decision. And that could work
But
for
it's
you.
sort of pure chance.
In the short run, it's pure chance. So what you have to do is, if you make that bet for 5 coin flips, it's largely luck because really anything can happen. If you make it over 100, it's a little better. If you make it over 10,000, 20,000, it's much better. The other analogy I like to give is that, look, poker is a game of skill. But every game of skill has a certain quantum of luck. Right. And in poker is much larger than other sports. So for example, tennis, you have a certain amount of luck, which is why a tennis match is 5 sets.
Right.
You want it to kind of even out and you want the better guy on the day to win. So if poker was played like that, it would be like 1,000 sets.
Right.
Just to give you a sense of the amount of luck involved. So which is why poker players are often taught that don't be results oriented. Just try to make the mathematically correct decisions, and if you keep doing that in the long run, it'll play out. In the short run, you may win, you may lose. It doesn't have any bearing on how well you played.
Right. So what's commandment number 2?
Commandment number 2
Thou
is
shalt not steal. No, sorry.
That's exactly what we're doing at the poker table.
Thou has to steal. Commandment number 2 is think in terms of ranges and not hands.
Okay.
A mistake that beginning players often make is they're thinking, अरे इसके पास इसने raise किया, मुझे 3-bet किया, इसके पास तो ace king होगा. But actually what you got to do is you got to think of the guy having a range of hands with which he could do that possible action.
Right.
Figure out the probabilities that, okay, this is the bottom part of his range and how often is he likely to play this. And then act against the range. And what often happens is that you might think that you're beating the guy's range 80% of the time, and you call his bet, and you find that he actually has a hand that beats you. It's not necessarily a bad decision.
Right.
He just happened to have that top 20% of his range.
Right.
So if you think in terms of ranges, and if you also consider how the other guy is perceiving you and thinking of your ranges, you start getting less affected by the immediate outcome of your decisions.
Right.
Because your outcome was against a particular hand.
Correct.
But your decisions have to be keeping his ranges in mind.
Right. Interesting.
The third one I'd say is when you're learning poker, don't ratta maro. Okay, now in India we have
a lot of people guilty of that.
So in India we have this tendency in education, we ratta maro everything. What happens in poker is, and when you join staking stables, and I've kind of been through this myself, is that especially in tournaments, that you're taught that okay, at 20 big blinds this is your shoving range, this is your reshove range. Correct. At 10 big blinds ye range. Everybody memorizes the range, but they don't know why that's a range. And what I would strongly recommend, and this is even more so true for cash games, is use tools like Pro Poker tools, where you're putting ranges against range and understand the why of everything.
So, sorry, just to cut you off, like, so there's a lot of people who will probably be unfamiliar with sort of the terminology. So, what do you mean by playing against ranges? So I just wanted to understand.
Okay,
that.
I'll tell you. So let's say your small blind is 100 and your big blind is 200,
right?
And there are antes of 25,
okay.
Right? So there's 500 rupees already in the pot,
right?
Now what happens is, let's say you have a stack of 10 big blinds, which is 2,000,
right?
So when everyone folds to you, you're the small blind.
Right.
And you've got one guy ahead of you and there's 500 in the pot. And so essentially at this point it's correct to shove with any two cards.
Right.
Because he's going to fold like 70% of the time. So 70% of the time you pick up the $500 already in the pot. And the rest of the time, no matter what you have some equity against his range.
Right.
So overall it's profitable. Now what often happens is that when people are taught poker or when they learn poker, they learn the ranges. Right, 10 jack suited, 12 big blinds, mujhe shove karna hai. What they don't learn is a why. And if they were to do the math themselves, their understanding of it would be that much deeper and they'd be able to make better decisions in situations which may not be so clear-cut.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Very interesting.
The fourth commandment is to be a good exploitative player, understand balance. Okay, so I'll just break down what I mean for you. There are two ways of playing poker. One is game theory optimal, which people call GTO,
right.
And one is exploitative.
Right.
Now, apart from really high stakes heads up cash games, no one really plays GTO.
Right.
Everybody plays exploitative, which basically means I try and figure out what your mistake is and I try and exploit that. But I feel that it's important to understand the concept of balance nevertheless. Now let me explain what balance is. Some people think balance only means you're mixing it up, but that's not really the case.
Okay.
Let's say we are on the river, right? I have to act and you have to act after me. And the pot has 300 rupees, I make a bet of 100 rupees.
Right.
Now, you have to call 100 rupees to win the total of 400.
Right.
So you're getting 4-1 odds, which means you have to be right 1 in 5 times for the bet to make sense.
Right.
Now, if I am a GTO player, when I bet, what I will do is I will make sure that exactly that percentage of my betting range is a bluff. So you're right. And the remaining 80% is value, which basically means that no matter what you do, I can't lose.
Right.
If you call too much or fold too much, I win. But even if you're absolutely perfect, I can't lose. Now, this is GTO and is very complicated because it depends on bet sizing and it applies to how you treat every hand from the start. Like there's a writer called Ed Miller who's written some great poker books and he calls it a pyramid. Right. So you start with a very wide range and every street you lose a certain part of your range and you keep it balanced at all times. Now, not everyone can think like this or even work out balanced ranges and that's fine. But the reason this is important to know is if you sort of have an approximation of what it is to be balanced, then you can figure out how other people deviate from balance.
Right.
And then you can exploit them. So for example, on the river, if I know that, okay, Peter calls too much, then I will not bluff so much against him. I will do more value bets. And similarly against you, if I know that, oh, he's scared, he's a new player, he folds too much, then I will do more bluffs against you. And, so the proportion goes up. Once you start doing this systematically, you will get a better sense rather than an intuitive sense. You'll actually get even your intuitive sense will improve because you're spending so much time with the numbers.
Right.
And people often say that, hey, I don't need to know what balance is because everyone plays exploitative poker, which is absolutely true.
True.
But if you have a sense of what a balanced range would be in a particular spot, you can immediately pinpoint he's calling too much, he's folding too much, this is a mistake, so I'm going to exploit it.
So that much more clarity comes through by having that kind of an outlook.
I mean, clarity of thinking is a key thing there, so you can't just go by feelings.
Right.
So where does
a lot of people have done that. Mujhe feel aa raha hai, mera patta khulne wala hai.
Aane wala hai.
Dude, that is such a heartbreaking line for me because I've been given so many bad beats where people saying, yaar, Amit, feeling thi yaar, kya? And I'm like, you were 2% to win.
No, so in all of this, where does having a poker face fit into all of this?
A poker face is actually kind of overrated. It's in pop culture you think poker to poker face, but actually it doesn't really matter over a period of time. Like you play any regular.
Because the idea is to sort of give away as little as you can, right?
See, if you're playing a balanced range, it doesn't really matter what your face is because your range is balanced. But even if you're playing exploitative poker, so I think everyone who plays a little bit learns to eventually control their emotions. And my eyes are very expressive expensive and all that. So what I would kind of do is, if I'm not wearing dark glasses, I'd like cover my face like this, and you sort of cover your neck, because some people you can see their veins throbbing.
Right.
Like one tell I used to look for in people is that. Try to make them smile. Try to banter and make them smile. Now, there are two kinds of smiles which come from two different parts of the brain. One is a natural smile, which affects a particular part of the brain. And the other is when you're asked to smile for a camera and you're giving a fake smile. And that's another part of the brain. So if you
that's a huge part of my brain.
Yeah. So if a guy's made a bet and you start bantering with him and you make a joke or something, which you should be able to do pretty well.
I'll try next time.
Yeah, so just get him to smile. And if it looks like a fake smile, he's scared. He's faking it.
Nice.
You know, he's not relaxed.
That's some good insight to
That
have
is
at
very
the table
cool.
next
I
time.
am totally doing this. I'm writing new jokes for poker nights. That's what I'm doing.
The last commandment is control your emotions. So while it's a game of math, what often happens is that it's very hard, even though you tell yourself that don't be results oriented. It's very hard when you're going through a bad session and someone's giving you bad beat after bad beat to be in control of your emotions, and you get aggro. You start playing unoptimally, you know, and the biggest lesson I learned in poker is that it's at the end of the day, you might know exactly what to do. And controlling emotions is tough because poker is, like you alluded to at the start of the podcast, is the only profession in which if you have a bad day in April, you can actually lose everything you earned in March.
Right.
You can lose large sums of money. And poker for me as a cash game player was always like 4 steps up, 3 steps down, 4 steps up, 3 steps down. And because of a tendency in the brain called loss aversion, which is like a cognitive fallacy, and we are hardwired to, what happens is that we take losses much harder. The pain we get from losses is much more than the joy we derive from winning. So, losing 1 lakh will hurt me much more than winning 1 lakh will be. I'll almost take it for granted.
In fact, it's so true, and of course you would know it more than most. We can't tell you the number of, and I speak for Amit and a lot of people who are on the scene, we can't tell you the number of bad beat stories we've heard versus the number of good win stories.
Yeah, so you've kind of got to be dispassionate and you've got to just take it with the flow, and you've got to remember that, man, and coming back to my first commandment, I am playing for the long term. This hand doesn't matter. This session doesn't matter. Did I make the right decision? If I didn't, how can I improve? What did I do wrong? What more information do I need? And so on. But controlling emotions is just such an important part.
Just about, if you're a serious player or you're aspiring to be like a serious player, you have to put in the time to analyze the game, analyze yourself, because that's the only way you're going to go up or you're going to be a winning player at the end of it.
And Peter, you and me have spent so much time in gaming rooms. We know how stressed out people get and how angry they get. And I've realized that, a few bad beats is the best way to reveal the man's character. How do you react?
There are some real cool cats who are out there. They've dropped, let's just say, a significant amount of money and they'll just take a walk around the park. Around the poker room anyway. And they're back at it, maybe 10 minutes later, and again, back on track. And then there are others who hit the bar, they've downed half a pack of cigarettes, and, they've just lost
I've seen
all
those types,
possible,
And I'd really say to add commandment 5.5, I'd say that don't play with more than you can afford to lose very easily.
Yes.
So
because that completely wipes you out emotionally if you do that. And what happens is a lot of the games now start so high and play so big that a lot of players by default kind of do that. And that's really stupid because downswings happen to the best players in the world. And you don't want to put money on the table that will hurt you if you lose. You just put enough so that, okay, I've had a bad night, and you go home. And
that's pretty much it. Even when we're playing games, I'll just say, okay, if I just lose whatever I put in at the beginning, I'm okay with that.
That's the price you're paying for a good time and for the opportunity. That's it,
Yeah, but then that's the social angle of playing poker.
But professionally, when it's your
if you're playing it for your livelihood, I don't think it's something that you can afford.
When it's your life role on the line.
Correct.
So we one of the things, so obviously you've been talking about, we've been talking about a lot of cerebral things, and I think you enjoy, there's a lot of people who are people from Harvard and MIT who've spent a lot of time building theories around poker. So do you feel that you actually enjoy the theory and the art to the game rather more than the game itself now?
Especially considering your writing background and
and considering now you gave it up
to a large extent. I mean, look, the whole field of game theory started with poker when Newman made early primitive poker. The sort of ballast on which he based game theory. But that's the thing. You see, that's the interesting thing about it. Poker is a game that is sort of on the intersection of being a real mind sport and of being pure gambling. And there is a dilemma there that you might be sitting at a table where you figure out everyone's numbers and you're thinking ranges and game theory or isko aise exploit karenge. But it is a game of skill, but this skill is just so long.
You can't ignore the luck component.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So we ask most of our guests about this. So who are the most interesting, like you see lots of characters in this business. So what are the most interesting types of people or players who you have observed, like in your games or in any game that you've ever seen? Like anybody who's stood out for you?
Yeah, look, I don't want to say anything disparaging about the people I played with. I mean, right. I've played with, and as I'm sure you have, with builders, film stars, gangsters. I mean, the whole gamut. There used to be a moneylender who would hang around around our games, waiting for someone to go broke so he could lend him money at extortionate rates, which has happened, and you know who I'm talking about. So. But I made some good friends playing the game, and I mean it is a very social game, and sometimes and it's very interesting because all of us essentially inhabit self-selected circles. Right. So your friends tend to be like you. Yes. They tend to have the same kinds of interests. But when you're playing poker, because you're just going with the game and you're going wherever you can get a good game, you're meeting a much more diverse bunch of people.
Incredibly so.
Yeah. Incredibly so. So I've played a game with a whole table of guys who were RSS members, who would go to shakhas and all that. Wow. People who otherwise I would never have come across in the normal course of things, right? And I've played poker in Washi with some of the biggest builders there who were snorting cocaine while they were playing.
Wow.
And so you just play all kinds, and it kind of reminds you that it reminds you not to commit the selection bias where you assume that, which is why a lot of us liberals got blindsided by Trump's win.
Right.
Because you thought, how could he win? It's so ridiculous. But because you're considering the world to be your world,
just that
and your world is not the world, there's something outside that, and poker exposes you to that.
Exactly.
Right. So hey, you did actually pick up and open up your mind a little bit, despite taking a back seat from
I mean,
regular life, I suppose.
Yeah, well, not after I've just got a bad beat from one of those guys where I'm thinking, oh man, kal chaddi pehan ke shakal.
Alright, that brings us to the end of another episode of Mera Kaam Poker.
Oh no.
Yes, hearing that pun again makes my heart die. Thank you so much to Mr. Amit Varma for coming in. Uska kaam hota tha poker, now maybe not so much.
Thank you for having me, and good luck at the tables.
Thank you so much. I am writing my jokes for my next game right now. Going to exploit this. Alright, thanks a lot. And where can we reach out to you, Amit, if people want to talk to you or just get in touch?
You can visit me at my blog, India Uncut, at indiauncut.com. I host a podcast called The Seen and the Unseen, which you can find at seenunseen.in, or download the IVM podcast app, and it's there with a lot of other podcasts, including this one. And on Twitter, I'm at Amit Varma. That's Varma with a V-A, not a V-E.
Yes, because Varmas with V cannot be trusted. Screw you, Saban Varma. Okay. And you can follow me at @Banat, and you can follow Peter on @Office of RG.
And for all our listeners who want to try out their hand at poker, you can log on to thespartanpoker.com, register yourself as a user with the promo code IVM, and you will get 200 bonus cash, which you can use to play poker for free. See you at the tables.
एक्सक्यूज मी भैया, एक्सक्यूज मी.
बोलिए मैडम.
मेन्यू में क्या है?
मेन्यू में सीन अनसीन है, पॉडकास्ट है, ऑन कोर्स है, साइरस है, मेड इन इंडिया, रीडिस्कवरी प्रोजेक्ट, एम्पावरिंग सीरीज, सेक्स वैक्स है, IVM लाइक्स है, सिंप्लीफाइड है, कीपिंग इट क्वियर है, ड्रिंक्स एंड डेस्टिनेशंस है, माय नेबर सकरबर्ग है, और द फैन गराज है. आपको क्या चाहिए?
एक बार रिपीट कर देंगे क्या?
रिपीट नहीं करता हम. आप जाओ IVMpodcast.com पे और सुनो ये सब, या फिर डाउनलोड करो उनका ऐप. सब आपकी उंगलियों पे.